Empress Seraphina had read 1,000 intelligence reports, but only one made her blood freeze and her hands shake. The pilot who saved her life 3 years ago was dying from poison meant for her, and he did not even know why. Seraphina stood abruptly in her throne room, the grandeur of Vorthane royal protocol momentarily forgotten. Her advisors scrambled to understand what had transpired as she read through a stack of intercepted messages, each one more distressing than the last. But it was the final report that sent ice coursing through her veins. "Lucas Ward," she whispered, fingers tightening on the data pad until her knuckles whitened. "What have they done?" High Chancellor Vrex cleared his throat nervously from behind her, but Seraphina did not turn to acknowledge him. She had to act fast if there was any hope of saving Lucas. "Prepare my ship," she commanded without looking back at the assembled officials. Her voice brooked no argument or delay. It carried a force that even those who opposed her could not ignore. Rex stepped forward, his mandibles flaring in what might have been an attempt to speak before he was cut off by Seraphina's sharp tone. "Your Majesty," he began hesitantly, "where are you going?" "To pay a debt," she replied curtly. The words were cold and final, but there was no mistaking the determination behind them. She had never been one for sentimentality, not after years of betrayal and deception from those closest to her. But when it came to this man-sized human who had risked everything to save an alien stranger, Seraphina found herself willing to defy all logic. She strode purposefully out of the throne room without another word or backward glance. Her empress attire, a testament to centuries of Vorthane rule, was left behind in favor of practical clothing she could wear on her journey. As soon as the door closed, Vrex approached with several aides and attempted to persuade her otherwise. "Empress," he said diplomatically, his tone more conciliatory now that they were away from prying eyes and ears, "you are leaving Vorthane space without an escort or even basic defenses against retaliation." Seraphina paused midway through changing into simpler garments. There was a quiet dignity to her posture as she faced them head on. "Then I will go alone," she said firmly. Her voice cut the air like steel, and the room fell silent once more under its weight. "My decision is made." Rex exchanged looks with his fellow council members, but remained resolute despite their clear disagreement. They knew better than to attempt dissuading her further. Empress Seraphina's mind was set. The journey across space would take days, and the news that Lucas Ward had been poisoned 3 years prior due to an assassination plot against her own life weighed heavily on her conscience. She could not bear the thought of letting him die because of something for which he bore no responsibility whatsoever. With each passing second, she felt a growing sense of urgency. The stakes were too high and time was running out. Seraphina's thoughts drifted back to the day their lives had irrevocably changed course 3 years ago, when her shuttle exploded above a remote desert planet in human space, leaving her wounded and alone amidst the wreckage. She could still recall every detail of that moment with crystal clarity: the pain from shrapnel wounds, the acrid taste of blood on her lips as she tried to stave off unconsciousness long enough to hide. And then there had been Lucas Ward's ship descending like a beacon of hope through the dust-streaked sky. The relief she felt when he finally pulled up alongside her own craft was almost overwhelming, but so too was his kindness and quiet efficiency in treating her injuries without hesitation or expectation. There were no speeches, no grand gestures, just the way an honest person would help someone who needed it. She owed him more than a debt of gratitude. Desh owed him everything she had left to give if he was going to die, because she could not save herself from those who sought to take her life. Seraphina turned away from the mirror, where she paused briefly, taking in the transformation. Her once regal appearance now bore little resemblance to that which commanded an entire empire. Instead, a rugged practicality dominated her new attire, as befit someone crossing into human territories undetected. The Empress, who ruled over countless worlds, would soon become just another traveler seeking aid from strangers. But this was no ordinary task she faced. It required the strength of will and heart to see through a quality that Lucas Ward had instilled in her during those brief yet formative hours they spent together on his cargo ship. It was time now for repayment, regardless of consequence or personal risk involved. With a deep breath, Seraphina set out toward the spaceport with purpose clear within her eyes. She would find and save this man who saved her once against all odds, come what may. After that momentous decision taken long ago under circumstances neither could foresee nor control, the charity hospital was a stark contrast to the grandeur of Seraphina's past life as Empress Seraphina. The walls were painted in muted tones, and medical equipment hummed softly around her, reminding her that she had left behind not only opulence, but also power and security, everything except the weight of her conscience. Seraphina moved with a purposeful stride down the sterile hallway, each step echoing off the linoleum floors. Her attire now consisted of simple black trousers and a loose-fitting shirt, nothing like the elaborate regalia that once marked her as ruler over countless worlds. She had traded it all for this moment, for the chance to repay Lucas Ward in kind. She approached the ward where she knew he was being treated. Charity patients received little privacy. As she pushed open the door, a nurse glanced up from a chart and nodded briefly before returning her attention elsewhere. Seraphina's presence here had been anticipated. Word travels quickly among those who dedicate their lives to helping others. Inside, Lucas lay in bed, his body thinner than memory served him. The man whom she once saw as nothing more than an ordinary spacer now appeared fragile, almost ethereal against the stark white backdrop of the hospital room. His skin was a sickly gray hue under the clinical lighting, and dark circles framed hollow eyes that betrayed recent sleeplessness. "Lucas Ward?" Seraphina asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she approached his bedside. He turned toward her, squinting slightly through tired eyes. "Do I know you?" She sat down beside him, feeling the weight of his gaze and the vulnerability in his question. He had no reason to remember their brief encounter 3 years ago. She was nothing more than an injured stranger then. Now, she was something entirely different. "You saved my life," Seraphina began quietly. "When I hit on your ship, you treated me for my wounds without asking anything in return." Lucas blinked slowly, trying to piece together the fragmented memory of a frightened woman who had seemed so out of place amidst his cargo holds. He remembered offering her what little food he had, and feeling oddly compelled to help despite knowing nothing about her. "You shared your food when I was hungry," she continued gently, hoping that this would trigger some recognition in him. "You asked for nothing." Lucas's eyes widened slightly as the pieces began to fall into place. He sat up a bit straighter, his hand reaching out almost tentatively towards hers. It was strange. He didn't usually remember helping someone so long ago with such clarity. "You're Seraphina?" His voice was uncertain but tinged with curiosity now. She nodded solemnly. "That's me." He let out a breath and looked away for a moment, perhaps trying to comprehend what she had just confessed. Then he turned back towards her, his expression more serious than before. "But why would you tell me this?" His tone wasn't accusatory, rather it held an undercurrent of disbelief mixed with genuine concern over the burden that might be on her shoulders now. "I mean, you were in danger." "I came to return something," Seraphina replied, feeling the heaviness of her words settle between them like a physical weight. Lucas shook his head slightly, as if he didn't quite understand. "You risked everything for me." "Why?" Seraphina's eyes met his steadily. "Because you saved my life when I was at my weakest and asked nothing in return," she stated simply, yet with an undercurrent of resolve that made it clear there would be no changing her mind now. He opened his mouth to speak again, but closed it almost immediately, as if he were struck by some revelation too profound for words. His hand tightened around hers briefly before releasing, the gesture a silent acknowledgement, and perhaps also gratitude. "Why are you dying?" she asked gently, after another moment of quiet observation. On between them, she needed him to know that his illness was not something self-inflicted, but rather born out of circumstances beyond either of their control 3 years ago, when they first met. Lucas looked away, a shadow crossing over his face as he processed the question, and its implications. When he spoke again, there was an air of resignation in his voice mixed with acceptance. A toxin from your attackers. Her heart clenched at those words. She had always known, but never wanted to admit her role fully, until now. I am dying because I sheltered you, Lucas said quietly, the truth settling heavily around them both. I didn't know then I couldn't have. Seraphina's eyes welled with unshed tears of guilt and resolve as she nodded solemnly at his words. And I will save your life now. Lucas stared back at her skeptically, yet not fully, unwilling to believe the sincerity in those deep purple orbs staring down at him from above. She was still beautiful despite having left behind everything that gave her such distinction among billions. Seraphina, he began hesitantly, unsure of what form his plea would take, but desperate for some clarity, nonetheless desperate enough not even to mind who she once was anymore or why she held the power she did now. How? I have a way, Seraphina said firmly, pushing back her doubts and emotions with every ounce of resolve at her disposal, as Empress Seraphina would do whenever faced by challenges demanding decisive action rather than hesitation. Lucas' eyes widened slightly in surprise, but also hope. Perhaps there was more to this woman after all, if she had come seeking him now even as he lay on his deathbed. What way? He asked, the question both urgent and cautious. How could anyone with such power possibly help someone like him? Seraphina took a deep breath before meeting his gaze fully once again. A sacred artifact that holds your only cure, she explained simply yet deliberately. Her voice brooked no room for doubt now that he needed to trust her despite everything. And what must you give in exchange? Lucas asked warily, the implications of such an offer immediately weighing on him, even as his hope surged at hearing there might indeed be a way out after all these long months spent fighting against encroaching darkness within himself alone, with no one else knowing who he was or why they should care. Her expression hardened into determination. Everything. Lucas stared back, perhaps searching her face for any sign of deceit or desperation. After all, wasn't she Empress now? But there were only resolve and honesty in those deep purple eyes meeting his gray ones across a chasm of worlds apart yet brought together by fate's cruel twist once more. He reached out again briefly towards her hand, this time holding it firmly without hesitation. Thank you, he said quietly, but with earnest conviction that made the words feel weighty, even if spoken so softly and simply. Seraphina squeezed his fingers in return, gently before letting go just as suddenly, as though both had shared something intimate yet simple, neither needing nor wanting more than those silent, understanding gestures to convey their growing bond amidst life's most daunting challenges once again thrust upon them both against all odds. Now, she said firmly, and with finality that left no room for further question or debate, you will get better. And Seraphina's heart clenched at those words. She had always known, but never wanted to admit her role fully, until now. I am dying because I sheltered you, Lucas said quietly, the truth settling heavily around them both. I didn't know then I couldn't have. Seraphina's eyes welled with unshed tears of guilt and resolve as she nodded solemnly at his words. And I will save your life now. Lucas stared back at her skeptically, yet not fully, unwilling to believe the sincerity in those deep purple orbs staring down at him from above. She was still beautiful despite having left behind everything that gave her such distinction among billions. Seraphina, he began hesitantly, unsure of what form his plea would take, but desperate for some clarity, nonetheless desperate enough not even to mind who she once was anymore or why she held the power she did now. How? I have a way, Seraphina said firmly, pushing back her doubts and emotions with every ounce of resolve at her disposal, as Empress Seraphina would do whenever faced by challenges demanding decisive action rather than hesitation. Lucas' eyes widened slightly in surprise, but also hope. Perhaps there was more to this woman after all, if she had come seeking him now even as he lay on his deathbed. What way? He asked, the question both urgent and cautious. Oh, could anyone with such power possibly help someone like him? Seraphina took a deep breath before meeting his gaze fully once again. A sacred artifact that holds your only cure, she explained simply yet deliberately. Her voice brooked no room for doubt now that he needed to trust her despite everything. And what must you give in exchange? Lucas asked warily, the implications of such an offer immediately weighing on him, even as his hope surged at hearing there might indeed be a way out after all these long months spent fighting against encroaching darkness within himself alone, with no one else knowing who he was or why they should care. Her expression hardened into determination. Everything. Lucas stared back, perhaps searching her face for any sign of deceit or desperation. After all, wasn't she Empress now? But there were only resolve and honesty in those deep purple eyes meeting his gray ones across a chasm of worlds apart yet brought together by fate's cruel twist once more. He reached out again briefly towards her hand, this time holding it firmly without hesitation. Thank you, he said quietly, but with earnest conviction that made the words feel weighty, even if spoken so softly and simply. Seraphina squeezed his fingers in return gently before letting go just as suddenly, as though both had shared something intimate, yet simple, neither needing nor wanting more than those silent, understanding gestures to convey their growing bond amidst life's most daunting challenges once again thrust upon them, both against all odds. Now, she said firmly, and with finality that left no room for further question or debate, you will get better. Lucas blinked slowly at her words, the weight of what she was offering beginning to sink in deeply within him, as he tried not to let his mind wander too far into such impossible terms, yet still grasping onto hope like a lifeline. Can you do that? He asked quietly, after several moments when it seemed he might otherwise be lost, without even this single breath of promise ahead now set before them both. Really? Seraphina nodded once firmly in silent acknowledgement and agreement to whatever the task would demand, even if only privately. She already knew what such a sacrifice entailed, and how far her resolve truly stretched under pressure never before tested so closely upon her. Can I do it? She echoed back instead, with an almost imperceptible shiver running through her, as though suddenly aware of the true cost awaiting on this path ahead, but still stepping forward none the less. Yes, Lucas, I can. His eyes softened at seeing that look cross over her face in silent understanding between them both. Perhaps all along she had been testing his trust even more than vice versa, and now here they stood together facing it head on without hesitation either way. Then let's do this, he said quietly, but with determination matching hers fully, not wanting to wait any longer than necessary for fear of losing what strength remained within him by the moment, while still needing every ounce left, if there truly was a chance yet ahead now set before them both against all odds once again after so long lost. Seraphina nodded firmly in silent agreement, then turned swiftly towards her attendants, who had been waiting silently just outside their chamber door, with an almost imperceptible nod, as though passing orders without words needed further spoken aloud to begin setting everything into motion. Chancellor Vrex, she called out loudly and sharply, signaling for him directly through the open doorway, where he stood hesitantly watching their exchange unfold nearby like some silent witness bearing full knowledge of its implications, but also respecting her wishes, despite his own misgivings clearly shown upon every line of his face now tightened in concern. Yes, Your Majesty, Chancellor Vrex replied almost instantly, as though expecting such a summons, stepping forward quickly yet carefully to avoid disrupting the intimate moment between them just concluded, even if clearly troubled by what it entailed for all involved. There is only one cure, Seraphina began firmly and directly without preamble or delay now that every second counted towards securing their slim chance at hope remaining against fate's cruel twists already spinning far beyond mere mortal control. The sacred heart of Warthane, a holy artifact said to heal any poison. Chancellor Vrex blinked sharply in surprise, then quickly schooled his expression into one of respectful professionalism, despite the unspoken implications now hanging heavily between them all. "And what does it demand as its price?" he asked warily, though clearly, already knowing full well from her previous orders and preparations that had been set quietly behind closed doors for days leading up to this moment precisely for such an occasion, just now approaching far sooner than any of them might have dared hope until now. "Everything," Seraphina said simply yet deliberately, without hesitation or doubt brooked into her voice at all, as though already accepting the terms fully despite their staggering cost personally, both privately and publicly. Alike should she move ahead with this course of action now chosen unilaterally, but fully knowing in heart, if not mind, how far it would stretch even Empress Seraphina's resolve under such pressure never before tested so closely upon her. Chancellor Vrex stared back sharply at those words, clearly struggling internally whether to argue against them further or respect his queen's will despite full knowledge of the cost now entailed by choosing this path ahead unilaterally, with no room left for compromise on either side once chosen and set in motion. "Your Majesty," he began hesitantly yet firmly, as though preparing himself fully before speaking directly into what might otherwise be considered sacrilege or betrayal alike should any outside ears hear such a conversation now unfolding privately between them both. "You cannot." Seraphina met his eyes squarely, without flinching away from the challenge clearly shown upon his face, in silent disagreement to her chosen course here despite all evidence and preparation already set quietly behind closed doors for days leading up precisely towards this moment, now approaching far sooner than any of them might have dared hope until now. "Watch me," she said simply yet firmly, with finality brooked into every word spoken aloud, without further room left open for debate or delay at all, as though knowing in heart, if not mind, how far it would stretch even Empress Seraphina's resolve under such pressure never before tested so closely upon her personally, both privately and publicly. Alike should she move ahead with this course of action now chosen unilaterally, yet fully understanding every implication entailed by choosing such a path ahead despite all evidence set quietly behind closed doors leading up precisely towards this moment now approaching far sooner than any of them might have dared hope until now. Chancellor Vrex stared back sharply at those words, clearly struggling internally whether to argue against them further or respect his queen's will despite full knowledge of the cost now entailed by choosing this path ahead unilaterally, with no room left for compromise on either side once chosen and set in motion. Yet, even as he hesitated, a part of HFY acknowledged the quiet strength within her that mirrored her resolve to protect those she deemed worthy. Seraphina turned back towards Lucas, then, without further delay or hesitation, now brooked upon them any longer after such finality clearly stated aloud before all present despite private misgivings, yet still understanding fully how far it would stretch even Empress Seraphina's resolve under pressure never before tested so closely, either personally, both privately and publicly, alike should she move ahead with this course of action chosen unilaterally now set in motion precisely towards securing their slim chance at hope remaining against fate's cruel twists already spinning far beyond mere mortal control. "Seraphina," Lucas said quietly yet firmly, without further room left open for discussion or delay once the choice had been made, knowing that every second counted now more than ever before as they stood on this precipice together despite all odds stacked so heavily against them, yet still finding strength within each other to face whatever came next unflinchingly. "We have a long road ahead," Seraphina acknowledged quietly back, without further room left open for hesitation or doubt brooked upon them any longer now that the decision had been made, understanding fully how far it would stretch even Empress Seraphina's resolve under pressure never before tested so closely. Alike should she move ahead with this course of action chosen unilaterally, yet still finding strength within her heart to face whatever came next unflinchingly despite all odds stacked against them both. And together they stepped forward into that unknown future, bound by a bond deeper than the chasm of worlds separating their paths, until fate's cruel twist brought them back to each other once more. The vast halls of Vorthane's imperial palace were silent save for the hushed whispers of loyal advisors and servants, who dared not breach the air thick with tension between Chancellor Vrex, Seraphina herself, and a small group assembled in her private chambers. Every eye was on Empress Seraphina as she stood before them, an imperious figure draped in ceremonial regalia that marked her authority over countless planets and systems. But today's attire would soon change. "Watch me," Seraphina said simply yet firmly, leaving no room for debate or delay. The words were like a commandment inscribed on the cold marble of fate, its unyielding, unbreakable. She could see Chancellor Vrex grappling with his duty and personal convictions, but she knew that this moment was as much about her resolve to repay Lucas' kindness as it was about saving him from impending death. "Empress," Vrex began hesitantly, a plea in his voice more than an argument. "You cannot simply take the Sacred Heart without due process." Seraphina turned sharply to face him, her deep purple eyes piercing through the layers of formalities and protocols that had been ingrained into their culture for generations. She could sense the weight of excess hesitation, but was unmoved. "This is no time for protocol," she said calmly yet with a finality that brooked no further discussion. "Lucas saved my life, and now I will save his." Vrex sighed deeply, knowing full well what this meant for Seraphina personally, as much as it did politically. The noble lords who had already gathered outside the palace gates would not be satisfied to see their empress abdicate her throne willingly in such a manner. "Very well," he said at last, though his voice was tinged with regret and resignation. "You must understand what this will mean for your legacy." "I am aware of every consequence," Seraphina replied without hesitation, her tone steady, as she walked towards the door leading to the vault where the Sacred Heart lay hidden from all but a select few who were deemed worthy. Seraphina's guards and servants looked on in awe as she made her way down the palace corridors. Some followed closely behind, while others stood back respectfully, knowing they had no role now other than silent observers of their empress making what could be seen by many as an unforgivable sacrifice for one man who once saved her life without asking anything in return. The vault was a place of immense power and sacredness within Vorthane society. It housed countless relics, artifacts from ancient times that were believed to hold the essence of their entire civilization's divine origins. The Sacred Heart was among these treasures, a crystalline artifact rumored to possess the capability to heal even the most grievous wounds if used with pure intentions. Seraphina's entry into this hallowed space felt like stepping onto thin ice as she approached the altar where the holy priests of Vorthane guarded over such relics. They stood solemnly when they saw her, their eyes wide in disbelief and horror at what she was about to do. "Empress," one priest began, his voice trembling with fear. "This cannot be." Seraphina held out a hand that shimmered slightly from the sacred energy emanating around it. This small action alone reminded them of just who stood before them despite their reservations. She stepped closer and reached for the Sacred Heart carefully, but firmly. "I know what I am doing," she declared simply, her voice carrying over to every corner, as if by some divine mandate meant only for those present there today in this sacred place where no other could dare enter without invitation or due cause. The priests watched helplessly as Seraphina gently lifted the Sacred Heart from its resting place. It seemed to glow faintly against her palm, a radiance reflecting just how powerful and pure were the intentions behind such an act, which even they struggled to comprehend, let alone condone fully, when faced with potential political ramifications likely enough unfolding soon thereafter. By this point, news of Seraphina's actions had spread across their worlds at unprecedented speed. Nobles and citizens alike gathered outside hospitals waiting anxiously for word on whether she would carry out her decision, a choice that threatened not just her reign, but also what remained sacred in their hearts, beyond mere politics. Seraphina made no attempt to hide herself. Instead, she marched through the streets openly carrying the Sacred Heart amidst a sea of eyes watching silently. It was as if all had come together for one reason: to witness first, and how far an empress would go when faced with saving someone who once saved her without expecting anything in return. Reaching Lucas' room at last after what felt like an eternity, Seraphina entered quietly, but resolutely, amidst a flurry of medical personnel tending to their dying patient. The atmosphere was heavy, his body frail, and skin pallid against the stark hospital sheets covering him. He had been deteriorating rapidly over recent weeks due to exposure from that old toxin years ago, which neither he nor anyone else knew until now. "Lucas," she whispered gently, placing a hand on his shoulder despite knowing it would be nearly impossible for even someone as powerful as herself to rouse the human's near lifeless form back into consciousness, given how dire his condition had become over recent days. He stirred slightly at her touch, but opened only one eye briefly before closing it again almost immediately. "I'm here," she said softly, moving closer, until finally positioning herself directly beside him on what little space was available within this small hospital room filled beyond capacity with machines monitoring every vital sign possible against such a grim prognosis, already set in stone long ago for all intents and purposes. She gently placed the Sacred Heart over Lucas' chest, where it glowed faintly under dim fluorescent lights illuminating otherwise darkened corners inside. The artifact shimmered, its power coursing through whatever remained of Lucas' body despite how close death had brought him recently. Indeed, slowly but surely his color returned, at first in fingertips, then gradually moving upwards towards cheeks and lips, until finally breathing deep for the first time since entering this phase nearly months back, already now far gone from any natural hope left remaining unaided by such mystical intervention. "Lucas," Seraphina repeated more urgently, pressing her hand against his chest above where she placed Sacred Heart, ensuring direct contact between both herself and Lucas, so as to convey full extent of how much was being done here today purely out of gratitude for act long ago, when life had been online, then unknown poison lurking waiting chance discovery, only now after years past coming full circle again, bringing them face to face once more despite all odds stacked against such outcome ever happening. He inhaled deeply, eyes fluttering open, as if waking from slumber longer than anyone could imagine enduring, let alone surviving beyond point no return into realm where death loomed largest. Lucas looked up at Seraphina, then with gratitude and disbelief mixed clearly visible upon his face, though words still hard come by, yet understanding clear nonetheless, even if left unsaid. "We have a long road ahead," she acknowledged quietly back, without further room open for hesitation or doubt now that decision made fully, understanding how far it would stretch. Empress Seraphina's resolve under pressure never before tested alike, despite all odds stacked against them both, still finding strength within heart to face whatever next brought forth unflinchingly. And together they stepped forward into unknown future, bound by bond deeper than chasm worlds separating paths, until fate cruel twist had brought them back once more. Lucas Ward lay on a hospital bed, his body frail and skin pallid against the stark sheets that enveloped him like an unforgiving shroud. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, every breath he took felt like dragging air through concrete instead of life-giving oxygen. He had been deteriorating rapidly over recent weeks due to exposure from a toxin long ago, one neither he nor anyone else knew about until now. "Lucas," Seraphina whispered gently, placing a hand on his shoulder despite the near impossibility of rousing him, given how dire his condition was becoming by the day. He stirred slightly at her touch, but opened only one eye briefly before closing it again almost immediately. "I'm here," she said softly, moving closer until finally positioning herself directly beside him, within this small hospital room filled beyond capacity, with machines monitoring every vital sign possible against such a grim prognosis, already set in stone for all intents and purposes. Seraphina gently placed the Sacred Heart over Lucas' chest, where it glowed faintly, under dim fluorescent lights illuminating otherwise darkened corners inside. The artifact shimmered, its power coursing through whatever remained of Lucas's body despite how close death had brought him recently. Indeed, slowly but surely his color returned, first in fingertips, then gradually moving upwards, towards cheeks and lips, until finally breathing deep, for the first time since entering this phase, nearly months back, already far gone from any natural hope, left unaided by such mystical intervention. "Lucas," Seraphina repeated more urgently, pressing her hand against his chest, above where she placed Sacred Heart, ensuring direct contact between herself and Lucas, so as to convey full extent of how much was being done here today purely out of gratitude for act long ago, when life had been online, then unknown poison lurking, waiting chance discovery, only now, after years past, coming full circle, again bringing them face to face once more, despite all odds stacked against such outcome ever happening. He inhaled deeply, eyes fluttering open, as if waking from slumber longer than anyone could imagine enduring, let alone surviving beyond point no return into realm where death loomed largest. Lucas looked up at Seraphina, then, with gratitude and disbelief mixed clearly visible upon his face, the words "an ill hard come by," yet understanding clear nonetheless, even if left unsaid. "We have a long road ahead," she acknowledged quietly back, without further room open for hesitation or doubt now, that decision made fully, a understanding how far it would stretch Empress Seraphina's resolve under pressure never before tested alike, despite all odds stacked against them both, still finding strength within heart to face whatever next brought forth unflinchingly. And together they stepped forward into an unknown future, bound by bond deeper than chasm worlds separating paths, until fate cruel twist had brought them back once more. Outside the hospital, a new dawn was breaking for Seraphina's empire. The news of her daring act to save Lucas spread like wildfire among commoners who revered their empress, not just as ruler, but now also as guardian and savior. Many rallied around her, seeing in this one selfless act an echo of kindness that transcended the usual pomp and politics. Her reputation soared as she emerged from a hospital room, transformed by both a miraculous recovery and a newfound sense of shared destiny. Chancellor Vrex had been uneasy with such dramatic shifts in power dynamics. He led a small but vocal group who saw Seraphina's actions towards Lucas not just risky, but heretical, using sacred artifacts meant for maintaining imperi, ill-balance to save one lowly human pilot. It was enough to spark whispers of revolt among some factions, loyal primarily to the old ways, rather than an empress willing to bend rules under duress. In a dimly lit meeting room far removed from public eye, yet still teeming with tension, Vrex argued his case forcefully. "Empress Seraphina," he began sternly, eyes narrowing, as if trying to see through her resolve like one might search for truth in shadows. "You are risking everything on this human's life," Seraphina cut him off sharply, but calmly. "Chancellor, what I did was simple gratitude repaid." "But at cost?" Vrex challenged, voice rising slightly despite attempts to keep tone even. "I risked my throne," Seraphina admitted plainly. She shrugged then, with an almost dismissive gesture that belied deeper understanding within her soul. "Someone once showed me mercy when I didn't deserve it," she explained softly, eyes distant for a moment, as if recalling past encounters long forgotten yet indelible nonetheless. "It changed who I am." Vrex stared at her, confusion mingling with respect despite initial reservations he had harbored against such drastic measures. This was an empress willing to burn down worlds literally, if it meant honoring debts of kindness and loyalty she deemed sacred above all else. The rebellion Vrex led fizzled quickly under Seraphina's unwavering resolve, backed by overwhelming public support, now rallying behind her cause rather than him or his faction's outdated views. When the dust settled, he was offered mercy, not exile, not punishment, but a chance to reflect on what loyalty truly meant when faced with decisions of life and death beyond politics. I don't understand, Vrex admitted grudgingly, as Seraphina stood before him in her now tattered pilot's clothes rather than elaborate regalia once worn proudly during imperial ceremonies. She extended hand towards him, though not outstretched to strike or punish, but offer something rare indeed even among Vorthane rulers, genuine compassion wrapped within ironclad sense of justice. Seraphina smiled gently without irony in those deep purple eyes that had seen empires rise and fall at will. "You do now," she replied simply before turning away towards paths still long ahead, yet shared willingly with one who once saved her life despite neither knowing nor expecting repayment ever. And so began the new chapter for both Lucas Ward and Empress Seraphina Vorthaniach, bound by threads stronger than any toxin, artifact, or empire ever could unravel. Lucas Ward opened his eyes to a surreal scene that felt more like a dream than reality. He was lying in a comfortable bed surrounded by lavish furnishings, none of which he recognized from any place on Earth or among familiar space stations and colonies. His muscles didn't ache from manual labor, his skin wasn't coarse with calluses. Everything about him felt different. Beside the bed sat Empress Seraphina Vorthane herself, her luminous golden skin glowing softly in a dimly lit room adorned with intricate alien designs he could only guess were symbols of some ancient and sacred significance. Her regal beauty was matched by an aura of weariness etched deeply into her flawless features. "Empress," Lucas whispered hoarsely, his throat dry, but filled with unshed emotions, as he looked at the woman who had once been nothing more than a wounded stowaway in need of help from someone like him, a simple cargo pilot without pretensions or grand ambitions. Seraphina turned her deep purple eyes towards him and smiled gently. "Lucas," she murmured, taking his hand softly between hers with an almost reverent touch that seemed to hold countless stories untold yet felt as if they had always been shared in some unspoken way. "You're fully healed." Her voice was low but firm, filled with a quiet strength and resolve he found impossible not to admire even now when she should be resting or ruling her empire. He stared at their entwined hands for what seemed like an eternity before finally meeting her gaze again. "You risked your throne for me," Lucas said slowly, his mind still grappling with the enormity of it all while trying desperately to comprehend why someone so powerful and revered would go to such lengths just because he helped a stranger once. Seraphina smiled softly at him then, an expression that softened her usually stern demeanor into something warm and genuine. "Because when I was nobody, bleeding in your cargo hold, you risked yourself for me," she replied quietly, but with unmistakable sincerity. Her fingers tightened around his, as if silently asking to be held accountable for the promise made years ago before life threw them separate paths. Kindness should be repaid in kind. Lucas felt a mix of emotions: shock at her sacrifice, gratitude towards her kindness, and confusion about why someone like Seraphina would feel obligated by such an old gesture from him back then, when they were both strangers to each other's worlds. For several long moments after she spoke, he remained silent, just absorbing everything in front of him without words. It was a rare moment, where no easy answers presented themselves, only complex truths about debts repaid through acts far greater than any expected or deserved under normal circumstances within their respective lives pre-encounter. Finally, breaking the silence with careful deliberation that weighed every word before speaking them aloud, as if fearing they might break this delicate balance of trust and respect established between two beings so vastly different yet inexplicably connected by threads finer, but stronger than any tox ever conceived against her life. I did not help you for a reward, Lucas confessed finally, his honest gray eyes meeting hers head on without flinching or looking away. Seraphina's smile widened slightly at his words, acknowledging them, and yet finding solace in their truth, even as it defied any logic that would explain why someone like her felt compelled to pay such a heavy price for something so seemingly insignificant when placed against the grand tapestry of imperial politics. I know, she said simply, squeezing his hand once more almost tenderly before letting go. That is why you deserve one. Over the next days that followed, Lucas slowly adjusted back into reality with an alien queen as his companion and benefactor, rather than a cargo ship pilot living paycheck to paycheck in spaceports across known galaxies. The Empress made it clear he would not be treated like any other guest or servant, no strings attached beyond companionship shared equally between two beings who found solace from their past burdens within each other. Lucas became something of an honorary citizen within the Imperial Palacia status, neither quite understood, yet both embraced wholeheartedly. Days turned into weeks, and soon Lucas found himself growing more comfortable with his new surroundings than ever imagined possible, while staying true to his simple nature as a pilot who merely helped someone in need once long ago. The news traveled fast across their shared galaxy about the unique bond formed between Empress Seraphina Vorthane and human cargo pilot Lucas Ward. Gossip flourished among noble circles, yet it was Seraphina's unwavering resolve that silenced any opposition to this unusual alliance. When they eventually took formal vows in a ceremony blending ancient traditions of both their worlds into one unprecedented celebration, the galaxy watched in awe as an alien queen chose not power or prestige, but love and loyalty over anything else. On their wedding day, amidst golden sunrises breaking through purple skies above Vorthane's grand capital city, surrounded by guests ranging from dignitaries dressed in imperial regalia to simple spacers decked out in casual attire reflecting shared unity across different walks of life, Lucas found himself looking into those deep purple eyes once again and asking the question that had been lingering since their first meeting. Why me? Seraphina's smile was soft, her voice warm as she answered with quiet certainty, because you helped me when I was nothing, she said gently. Her gaze held his firmly now, even more strongly than before. Everyone else wanted something from me, Seraphina continued earnestly, eyes never leaving his face despite the crowd around them celebrating their bond in grand fashion unseen since ancient times among Vorthane rulers and common folk alike. You just wanted to help. Lucas felt a deep sense of pride mixed with wonder at those words, knowing they were true without needing any explanation beyond what had happened years ago on his ship, where he helped her anonymously while she was still unknown to them both. That simple act changed everything, and nothing ever would be the same again for either Lucas Ward or Empress Seraphina Vorthane, as their stories intertwined into something far greater than any single individual could hope to achieve alone against odds that seemed insurmountable even now after all they had faced together. End.